you look tantalizing. You know, I make fun of The View a lot, but that's only because they keep talking. Because COVID also taught Sunny Hostin how to get her groceries delivered.
3 years, that's when I discovered Instacart. And I give them a big tip because they don't always pay their people well, and so that's been an issue, I think, for the company. But man, you can get toiletries, you can get fire logs.
Fire logs? She had to tell the audience that she tips big because even she knows she sounds insane.
The term woke has been, in my view, co-opted by the right and weaponized and bastardized. So I was surprised to hear you use the term because historically, as you know, because I think you're quite brilliant, that woke is a word used by the Black community to note that we must be aware of social injustices.
But words migrate.
Why is that a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing, and originally that was absolutely a great thing. Don't tell me that the left hasn't changed. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it was the conservatives who hated the Jews.
People have to wonder, where does Sunny Hostin get her opinions? Yeah. Like you said, it's obviously from her husband. She has to tell her what to say in The View, because without it, she's got nothing up there. She's not very bright. So, but the problem with her is that
If I had any doubt that I was right about the change that's happened in the left, watching people protest for a terrorist organization like Hamas, that straightened me up pretty quick.
You can see the way Sunny Hostin, the way she's touching her above her eye, and she can't even look at him because she's an activist, not a journalist or whatever it is that she purports.
It all started with a show millions love to hate, The View. You've seen the clips, smug faces, loud opinions, and a roundtable that somehow turns every topic into a group therapy session. But this time, things took a wild turn. The spotlight wasn't just on politics or policy, it was squarely on Sunny Hostin, who casually revealed how she tips Instacart drivers generously. Sounds nice, right? But it wasn't generosity she was showing. It was damage control.
it's about the view. It's become like a medical hospital that displays human misfailure. Like it's like here, let's look at this political oddity. You know, it's like, it really is like the left-wing equivalent of a carnival sideshow, except instead of bearded ladies and fat clowns and two-headed cows. Well, let me rephrase that. But The View is a victim of the sunk cost fallacy.
She went on about how she discovered delivery apps 3 years ago, like she had stumbled across fire. Then she threw in a side comment that she tips big because, apparently, Instacart doesn't always pay well. The irony? She said all this while talking about ordering toiletries and fire logs. This wasn't activism, it was elite guilt, polished up as virtue. And here's where it got worse. Even the live audience seemed unsure whether to clap or cringe.
Now speak the truth, and when for years you've been telling lie after lie after lie, now you're carrying this big bag of rocks around you because it's too harmful for their ego to admit that we really were dishonest. And they could be honest. All they would have to say is, look, we hate Trump so much. We were willing to lie about Joe Biden because we felt he was preferable. We thought our lying and our cover-up was on your behalf. Just say that. You're still scum, but at least you're honest.
Sunny had that look smiling, but nervous like someone trying to convince themselves they didn't just embarrass themselves on national television. By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share more intriguing stories. Now let's continue.
If you think that's bad, The View's co-host, Sunny Hostin, says, hold my beer, and is literally claiming Republican women can't think for themselves.
I think that women, white women in particular, want to protect the patriarchy here because it's to their benefit. Yeah. They want to make sure that their husbands do well. They want to make sure that their sons do well. They want to make sure that their children do well. And they want to make sure that they do well. Most of the women in some of these studies are married white women, and they do fall in line with what their husbands.
Because things only got messier. This wasn't just about fire logs or delivery tips. It was about what came next when two unexpected voices teamed up to completely flip the table on Sunny Hostin, exposing the cracks in her whole performance. Now, here's where the show turned from awkward to explosive.
Hostin's obsession with race gets thrown back in her face. Today's video comes to us from Sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in Sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out she's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe. Here's how she took the news. Roll it.
Wow.
Out of nowhere, a term dropped into the conversation like a spark in a dry forest woke. Sunny Hostin, with her usual righteous tone, looked surprised, almost offended that the term had been used. She jumped in, saying woke was a word born in the Black community meant to raise awareness about injustice, that it was a good word, a word with history. But then the tone shifted. Across the table, the response came fast and sharp. The problem wasn't the word itself, it was how it had been twisted and turned into something totally different.
Here's a treat for you, the insufferable Sunny Hostin getting a beatdown from Bill Maher on Gaza.
We're all concerned about the innocent civilians that have been collectively punished and murdered, largely children and women. And are you at all concerned about the fact that the International Criminal Court just today issued a subpoena for Bibi Netanyahu?
Well, that's ridiculous, but it's a war.
Why?
Because it's a war, and they were attacked, and they're defending themselves. Now, this is a war. Do you think Hamas needs to be destroyed? This is the question.
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
So how can we do that with a ceasefire?
All right. So Hamas needs to be destroyed because they are a terrorist organization who say openly that they want to commit genocide on the Jewish people.
And here's the twist. The person challenging her wasn't even a conservative. It was someone from her own side of the aisle, pointing out how the left had changed. How defending the word woke without acknowledging what it had become was just dishonest. Sunny tried to keep the upper hand, flashing a tight smile and trying to sound wise, but you could see the panic behind her eyes. She wasn't ready for that kind of pushback, especially not from someone who wasn't wearing a red tie. Her whole argument felt rehearsed, like she was delivering a speech she practiced in front of a mirror, not having a real conversation. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a total mismatch of reality versus rehearsed talking points. And from this moment on, it was clear Sunny wasn't in control of the conversation anymore.
A lot of fun. But Bill Maher did get to go on The View, and he said some things that offended the small minds over there. So he had a bit of a debate with the intellectual titan, Sunny Hostin. She was upset with him for using the word woke, and Bill Maher took her to school.
What happened next was something no one expected. Two totally different worlds collided right there at the table. On one side, you had Greg Gutfeld, known for sarcasm so sharp it could cut glass. On the other, a famously blunt liberal who doesn't care whose feelings get hurt. They don't usually agree on much, but in this moment, they found a common target: Sunny Hostin's logic. And they didn't hold back. Gutfeld came in with snark, calling out how Sunny seems to get her opinions delivered, along with her groceries like her ideas weren't her own, but picked out for her, gift-wrapped, and handed over by someone else. The implication was brutal. She talks like a puppet, and the string puller? Her husband, her friends, maybe even the internet, anywhere but her own head.
I make fun of The View a lot, but that's only because they keep talking. Those hens are always clucking. They get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, and then I get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, except on purpose. But every now and then, one of those dingbats inadvertently says something that reveals modern liberal thought so perfectly, it deserves further study. You know, like a weird serpent that washed up on the beach and you want to poke it with a...
Then came the real turning point, when protests in support of Hamas entered the conversation. That's when Sunny froze. She wouldn't make eye contact. She touched her forehead, looked away, didn't say a word. Because now it wasn't about soft political takes or buzzwords. This was about people marching for terrorist organizations and being okay with that. And right then, the message from both men was clear. This wasn't a journalist talking, it was an activist pretending to be one. Someone who doesn't analyze situations, just reacts with pre-scripted outrage.
All of them, actually, that montage we showed, their absurdity strengthens the Republicans at this point. Because Republicans are like, oh yeah, you've been saying that about us. And I think ever since I got into politics since 1995, Democrats, as I recall, Democrats have been saying this about Republican women. They just never change. It's not, talk about not fresh. They got nothing else, and so they don't want to defend their policies, so what they try to do is to make the other team more toxic.
The table had flipped. And Sunny? She wasn't just losing the debate, she was getting exposed. Now at this point, Sunny wasn't just in hot water, she was practically boiling. And it wasn't just because of what she said, it was how she said it. She didn't speak like someone trying to understand or discuss. She spoke like someone who walked in already convinced she was right, no matter what. She talks with this polished, almost theatrical voice, like every sentence is meant to be quoted in a college thesis or printed on a protest sign. But here's the truth. Behind all that flair, there's nothing solid. No real facts, just big words and emotional buzz phrases.
His willingness to say to Sunny Hostin that you can call it whatever you want, but we're talking about the radical left. It is amazing how they then just attempt to redirect the conversation.
1 minute, she's preaching about moral superiority. The next, she's name-dropping terms like systemic injustice in the yogurt aisle. Literally, she once tried to explain inflation using oat milk prices at brunch. You can't make this up. And when it came to white Republican women, Sunny went even further. She claimed they vote the way they do because they want to protect the patriarchy, as if they're all just blindly obeying their husbands. That moment, that's when Greg leaned back, didn't even raise his voice, and just let the absurdity speak for itself.
Aim probably virtue signals on the toilet. But that's not the point here. While everybody else was trying to figure out how to survive as the government told us that breathing in public could kill us, Sunny was lolling around in her big house clicking on pictures of arugula while mixing Cocoa Puffs into her hog.
Watching her try to intellectualize current events felt like watching someone read Shakespeare through a kaleidoscope. Beautiful language, completely distorted meaning. And that's when it became obvious. Sunny wasn't trying to win a debate, he was performing for applause. But no one was clapping. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. For years, Sunny Hostin had built her brand around racial justice fighting for reparations, calling out white privilege and painting herself as a voice for the oppressed. But then, someone pulled the receipts. Literally. She appeared on PBS's Finding Your Roots, the show that reveals celebrity ancestry. And what did they find? Sunny champion of anti-racism. Loudest voice in the room on historical oppressionists, a descendant of European slave owners. Let that sink in. The same person calling out others for benefiting from systemic injustice turned out to have that same injustice in her own bloodline. And when she heard the news, she sat there stunned, eyes wide, saying nothing. The irony was too heavy to lift. All those speeches, all those takes about privilege and oppression suddenly looked like theater. And not even good theater. This wasn't about exposing history. This was about revealing just how shallow her whole narrative had become. The audience watching? They weren't angry. They were confused. How could someone so loud about justice not have done the homework on her own background? And more importantly, why did she still act like the authority? This wasn't just a gotcha moment, it was a full-blown credibility collapse. And the timing couldn't have been worse because her next big moment? It was about to get even more uncomfortable. Next up came a moment so uncomfortable you could feel the tension through the screen. They started talking about the war in Gaza. Now, this wasn't just a headline topic, it was raw, emotional, serious, and Sunny? She jumped right in, accusing Israel of murdering civilians, bringing up women and children, and claiming the International Criminal Court had just issued a subpoena for Netanyahu. Then came the pushback. A simple, clear question was thrown her way. Do you think Hamas needs to be destroyed? Sunny blinked, paused, stumbled, and then said yes, but immediately followed with talk of ceasefires and concern for civilians, like she couldn't commit to her own answer. It was like watching someone try to argue against terrorism, without sounding too harsh on the terrorists. That's how backwards it got. Her logic tied itself in a knot. She was outraged, but selective, demanding nuance, but refusing to give it. Talking about genocide, but downplaying who started the war. She wasn't making a moral argument, she was throwing out buzzwords and hoping they'd land. And across the table? The others weren't buying it. They didn't even need to yell. They just sat back, letting the contradictions pile up, knowing the audience could see it for what it was. A shaky opinion built on headlines, not facts. This wasn't political commentary, it was emotional theater. And the more she talked, the more it unraveled. By now, it was clear Sunny wasn't just losing the argument, she was losing the room. What made it worse? She genuinely believed she was the voice of reason. She sat there, calm on the outside, absolutely convinced that her take was the intellectual anchor of the entire conversation. But from the outside looking in, it was like watching someone confidently walk straight into a glass door. Her arguments were collapsing one by one, but she never noticed. While she delivered every line like it came from a TED Talk titled, "Why I'm Always Right," the others just let her keep digging. Every dramatic pause, every raised eyebrow, every deep moral statement, none of it landed. And then came the kicker. She claimed that having nuanced conversations is a privilege. Let that sink in. According to Sunny, just being able to talk calmly and logically about serious topics is somehow a luxurious if thinking clearly is only for the privileged. The room froze. That kind of take doesn't spark dialogue, it shuts it down. She turned reason into a villain and herself into the victim. And while she stared down the table, waiting for applause, all she got was silence. This wasn't debate anymore, it was delusion in real time. And the people around her? They weren't trying to fight, they were trying to rescue the conversation from collapsing under the weight of her nonsense. And just when you thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, Sunny doubled down. She started talking about how only people who've personally experienced depression can truly understand systemic issues. Sounds deep, right? But here's the problem. She doesn't actually believe that not when someone else brings a different experience that disagrees with her. Because if your story doesn't match her narrative, suddenly your experience doesn't count. You're either uninformed, part of the problem, or, worst of all, privileged. It's not about truth for her, it's about control. She picks which truths matter. And the hypocrisy? Blinding. She'll stand on stage talking about oppression while earning a six-figure TV salary in a luxury studio. She'll talk about how people can't understand injustice, but shuts down anyone who tries to bring up a different side of the story. That's when the room stopped debating her and just started observing, watching her flip and twist every idea into something dramatic. One second she's angry, the next she's wounded. And all the while, the actual point is gone, lost in a fog of emotional grandstanding. The ones sitting across from her didn't even need to argue anymore. They just sat back as she buried herself in contradictions, talking louder, but saying less. Like someone trying to win a game by making up new rules every 5 seconds. At this point, you could almost feel secondhand embarrassment. Because while everyone else was discussing ideas, Sunny was turning the entire show into a one-woman performance piece. She wasn't debating, she was delivering monologues. Every sentence sounded like it was pulled from a self-help podcast titled, "Why I'm Always Morally Superior." And honestly, it started to feel like she wasn't even trying to convince anyone, she just wanted claps, trophies for having an opinion. She threw around phrases like they were sacred truths. But when someone asked her to explain, she'd spiral into unrelated stories about brunch or oat milk or Whole Foods. It was like watching someone try to build a house with motivational quotes instead of bricks. And Greg Gutfeld? He didn't even try to debate her point by point. He let her unravel herself. A smirk here, a raised eyebrow there, and that was enough. Because Sunny's own contradictions were the real punchline. At one point, she claimed to be the voice of the unheard. And without missing a beat, the others just looked at her like, unheard? You're on national television every day, paid more than most Americans make in a decade. That's the thing, her entire message falls apart when you compare it to her reality. She's not underrepresented, she's not silenced, she's just loud. And that's not the same thing as being right. And then came the moment that felt like the final nail in the coffin. Remember how Sunny constantly throws around buzzwords like systemic oppression and white privilege like she's lecturing a college class? Well, now she was about to get a dose of her own medicine. Because someone brought up her past again. Turns out, not only is she a descendant of slave owners, but she's built a career demanding reparations while cashing in on outrage. So, someone finally asked the obvious question, how do you preach about injustice while living in luxury paid to complain? No answer. Just that frozen smile again. And then came the most brutal part. When she said Republican women can't think for themselves, that they fall in line with what their husbands want, that's right. She didn't just generalize as she insulted an entire group of women as brainless followers. And she said it with complete confidence, like she was reading a fact. Greg didn't even need to react much. He just let that comment hang in the air, because it didn't need sarcasm. It didn't need a joke. It was so arrogant, so disconnected from reality, that it embarrassed itself. Sunny had turned the conversation into a crash course in double standards. She demanded respect but gave none. She preached tolerance but attacked those who disagreed. And worst of all, she did it while pretending to be the reasonable one. Now picture this. You're watching someone try to win a serious debate with energy that feels like a PTA election speech all flair, no facts. That's exactly what Sunny brought to the table when she tried to lecture two of the sharpest critics on television. She speaks like every opinion is a revolutionary thought, like the world's been waiting for her to drop truth bombs. But instead of dropping anything meaningful, she rambled about brunch prices, oat milk, inflation, and vibes disguised as facts. At this point, even the audience didn't know whether to laugh or cringe. Greg Gutfeld didn't have to say much, his sarcasm did all the work. He just let Sunny's wild contradictions burn themselves out. No research, no clear logic, just attitude. And while she tried to gotcha him with moral outrage, he treated her arguments like a waiter offering kale chips thanks, but no thanks. And then there was the reveal from that Ancestry show, again still haunting her. The irony of Sunny shouting about systemic injustice while having European slave owners in her bloodline was too big to ignore. The same woman who talks about privilege as if she's the exception was now the example. All the while, she kept tossing out phrases like patriarchy and suppression as if that alone ended the discussion. But those words don't carry weight when they come from someone who clearly isn't interested in hearing anyone else. By now, it wasn't a debate. It was rhetorical slapstick. Sunny kept tripping over her own arguments, and no one had to stop her. She was doing it all by herself. And here's where it all just unraveled completely. Sunny started tossing out these emotional, dramatic claims like she was starring in some courtroom drama. Every disagreement became a moral crime, every counterpoint a personal attack. She didn't just disagree, she excommunicated ideas like she was the gatekeeper of all truth. At one point, she even suggested that having a civil, balanced conversation was a form of privilege. Seriously, she claimed that being calm and logical in a debate was something only privileged people could afford. That's when the people around her stopped arguing and just stared. Because how do you even respond to that without laughing? Meanwhile, Greg Gutfeld and the others didn't need to bring charts or stats. They brought common sense, and it was more than enough. Watching them poke holes in her takes was like watching someone pop overinflated balloons. Quick, easy, and strangely satisfying. Sunny, on the other hand, stood there like a teacher scolding a classroom that had already left for recess. She didn't want dialogue, she wanted validation. Her goal wasn't understanding it, was applause. And when the applause didn't come, she just talked louder, convinced that volume equals value. It was a painful watch, not because it was a heated argument, but because it was a complete mismatch. A woman delivering half-baked outrage, surrounded by people who had no interest in playing along, and it was only going downhill from there. And then came the final stretch, the meltdown in slow motion. Sunny was still talking, still confident, still convinced she was dropping knowledge. But at this point, no one was even debating her anymore. The others had stopped engaging because her takes had drifted so far off reality, they didn't need pushback, they needed subtitles. Every sentence sounded like it came from a how to sound smart while saying nothing seminar. She talked like experience was the only valid credential, unless your experience disagreed with her, in which case, it didn't count. Suddenly, victims of terror, survivors of war, or anyone not aligned with her views, just wrong. Possibly brainwashed. Probably part of the system. Meanwhile, her logic was flimsier than a plastic patio chair in a hurricane. She flipped from claim to claim, dramatic one-liners with no connection to reality, hoping no one noticed the wreckage she left behind. But Gutfeld did. He didn't argue fact, she used tone, and that was enough. Sarcasm is his weapon. And Sunny? She handed him all the ammo. Watching her try to gotcha him with moral superiority was like someone trying to shame a cat for knocking over a glass. He just smirked, shrugged, and let her unravel. And when she tried to land one final blowsome grand statement about systemic injustice and unheard voices, simply asked how that explains her $1 million salary and national TV spotlight. The silence that followed said everything. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.